This is Matt and his wife Christine, ex-Mormons, and tonight's a discussion about their experiences. So it's over to Matt now, okay?
All right, yeah, so they asked me to talk a little bit about Mormonism, specifically about good things and bad things, and about our experience of leaving. And so immediately I decided I was going to talk a little bit about Mormonism in general to give you a frame of reference. I don't know how many of you are very familiar with the Mormon Faith, but it considers itself to be unique, right? It could be classified as a Protestant faith. They do not consider themselves to be Protestants. It's was founded by Joseph Smith and his family and some colleagues, and to give you kind of that frame of reference, it's the very beginning of the 19th century, and in Western New York, where Joseph Smith was raised, was referred to as the burnt out area. And what this means is that there were these big religious revivals in the 18th century, the 19th century, and then the later 19th century, where it's kind of like the backlash against the Enlightenment and non-religious belief, and where you had a lot of religious preachers going through and congregationalizing people. Lots of stump preaching, outdoor gatherings, getting people really excited about religion and belief and spiritualism, which had kind of been ebbing off in the American frontier, where they didn't worry much about organized religion. And so that's kind of the framework where it goes. And it's hard for me to break away from the standard Mormon narrative here and go into kind of the Joseph Smith and his family and who they were. So Joseph Smith's father was a very charismatic person, and he married a wealthy woman, and she brought a lot of money into their relationship, which was gone very quickly because he was not interested in working the land. He was interested in kind of get-rich schemes, and none of that panned out. He wasn't very successful in any of these ventures. And so Joseph Smith, when he was young, was very poor, but they weren't proper farmers because that's too much work, right? They went out and did a lot of treasure hunting, and this is kind of the family business, as it were. And the way that works at the time, because there's not enough money to be had by finding Native American burial sites and looting them to live off of, right? And a lot of that area has been picked over, and people have already done a lot of looting. And so what you have to do is you have to find someone to sponsor you to try to find treasure. Well, how do you find treasure? Well, we don't have any modern technology to do it, and so you rely on the tried and true methods of the time, which is usually a seer stone. And of course, it's the American frontier. There are no crystal balls. So a seer stone is a special rock that you find that's better than other rocks. Right? There's something magical or mystical about it. It's especially round or colorful, or if you have a good sense for the sort of thing, you can pick out the magic rocks. And the trick is you put it in a hat, and then you cover it with your face to block out the light, and then you can receive messages or see things through the stone, and that will help you find treasure. And so if you are someone that wants to sponsor an activity like this, you find someone with a reputation for finding treasure, and they will use magic to find treasure. And I wanted to come to the correlation, but I didn't know if they did it in this country, or dowsing rods, or dowsing in the water. Okay, so it's the same kind of idea. You find someone with the skill, and they have the dowsing rod, and they can find the water and tell you where to dig a well. And so Joseph Smith and his father, they would and his brothers to some extent, they would tell people where to dig for treasure. So back to the Great Awakening, Joseph Smith's very confused by all the conflicting stories. Everybody's saying we're teaching the Word of God, we stepped away from organized religion, we hate Catholics, we love God, we love the Bible. This is what the Bible tells us, and they don't agree. And so then Joseph Smith, when he's 14, prays and asks God for guidance, and then he has a vision. And depending on who he's talking to and when he told them, this vision varies a lot. It's either he dreams about an angel, or angels come and visit him, or a lot of angels come and visit him, Or finally, God the Father and God the Son as separate beings come and visit him and tell him that none of the churches are right and that he needs to wait. And so, and this is interesting to me for another point, because when we were growing up, there was only one version. It was not the version that Joseph Smith wrote himself. It was the version that was printed later in his life in the local newspaper. And that's the one with God the Father and God the Son. And it brings into the whole issue of plurality of gods, Mormons versus Christian. Is there a God the Father, and is Jesus the Christ a separate God? Mormons say yes. Christianity says no. That there's one God. Now, stepping back into the historian side. So Joseph Smith in the early 1820s went with his father on a treasure hunting trip, and they'd left New York, and they'd gone, and they were down in Pennsylvania, and they were boarding with this guy, Mr. Hale, who was a gentleman farmer. And Joseph Smith and his daughter, Emma, became friendly and developed a relationship. They ended up marrying against Emma's father's wishes, because he's like a poor kid that cons people out of money for a living. And he was a working man. And there's this fairly tearful confrontation between Joseph and his father-in-law, where Joseph promised, says, okay, yes, I've been doing this, but I'm going to give it up. I'm going to stop hunting for treasure. I'm going to become a farmer. I'm going to work the land. I'm going to be an honest man. And he marries Emma, and his father helps set him up in a farmstead, and he has this life. But it's not the life that fits, right? Joseph Smith is a bigger man than that. He can't just be a farmer. So then there's a story that I used to tell my kids about Uncle Joe. So a little bit about myself now. I grew up in a very Mormon community. I grew up in a very Mormon family. On my street, there were 3 houses that were not Mormon. I didn't know who lived in those houses. They were not members of our congregation, or our ward, as you would call it. I didn't know who they were, but there were these 3 houses. I knew which ones, like that one, and that one. People that weren't Mormon lived in them. I don't know. And there were 2 streets, is all, and that's our congregation of about 350 people. A very Mormon area. She grew up in probably more, because she says there was 1 house on her street, not 3. So I was exposed to iniquity at a young age. I went to a high school where 70% of the students went to optional religious classes during the school day. Right? So I grew up knowing my genealogy back to the Smith family. See, my name's Matt Goodrow. My mother was Julie Nichols. Her mother was Elaine Cannon, whose mother was Alice Nelson, whose mother was Leonora Smith, whose father was Joseph Fielding Smith, whose father was Hiram Smith, Joseph Smith's brother. And so I know this. Right? There are not really direct descendants of Joseph Smith in the Mormon Church. Of his 5 children who survived, none of them went west when the Mormons went west. They all stayed. They didn't stay in the Mormon Church because his wife did not. But we'll get there. So, anyway, this is where I come from. Mormon. That I didn't know. I knew there were other things, but I knew they were bad. I knew they were wrong. It's like Jewish people grow up knowing that shrimp are bad, right? Or Muslim people grow up knowing that bacon is bad. I knew that all other religion was wrong and bad. Okay, because the best lie that Satan ever told was the wrong Jesus. Because if you can make a lie look like the truth, then you win. People are more likely to believe it. So the Mormon Jesus is the right Jesus, and all other Jesuses are the devil. Okay. Joseph Smith, so Uncle Joe, he's at the farm. He doesn't like it at the farm. He likes to go into town. He goes into Kirtland, Ohio. It's nice there. It's a town. There are people. There are nice clothes. There are nice things. And he's in there one day, and he sees an easy mark named Martin Harris. He's like, that guy is going to make my day. And he goes up to Martin Harris, and he says, look, Martin, my name is Joseph Smith, and I have a gift for finding treasure. And I know that there is a golden book out there. And if you give me $20, we will find that golden book, and we will be rich. And Martin Harris gave him $20. And I'm sure that the pitch was better than that. I just don't have Joseph Smith's ganache for salesmanship, or I would live in a much nicer house. Right? But in any case, he got money. And did not go get a golden book, right? And Martin Harris, a gentleman farmer, didn't let up. So he kept on Joseph Smith. Where's the golden book? Where are we going to find the golden book? And so then we find my very favorite first vision story. Okay, the best one is that Joseph Smith tells the guy he has to make a box. He's like, dude, I need you to build me a box. I need this wooden box. I'm going to pay for you later, right?
Yeah.
I'll pay for it, but I need it to get this golden book. And then Joseph Smith goes and he gets the book. And this is the story he tells to this gentleman. Is I went to get the golden book because I knew where it was. I found it. And I got out there and I dug it up and there was the golden book. And then I went to get it and then there was this toad. And it told me I couldn't take the book. And I tried anyway, but then the toad hit me with a stick 3 times. And
Three times, it must return.
3 times. And it wasn't able to get the book. And so I can't pay you for the box, right? But this is not, of course, an official story. The official story is that Joseph Smith went out and he was told, because this is the way it works with earth magic, you have to follow the rules. And if you're really into spirits, or I know there's a lot of this, especially in Irish rural culture, about the spirits of the land and following the rules. Don't look back. You know, all of if you're going to take the book, you can't set it down. So you take the book out of the ground, you can't set it down. Joseph Smith went and got, in the official story, went and got the book, and he set it down on the ground to put the lid back on the box. So he gets out, digs up the stone box, takes the lid off, there's the book in there. He sets the book down, and then he goes, gets his box, and goes to put the book in the box, and the book isn't there anymore. It's back in the box in the ground. And he goes to take it back out of the ground, and an angel appears. And the angel explains to him that he didn't follow the rules. And so he's going to have to wait 3 years. He has to come back every year. And for 3 years, he can't take the book because he broke the rules. You can't look back. Or he'll turn into a pillar of salt. You can't send down the book. Or it disappears and reappears somewhere else. So, which is funny to me now looking back, because one of the things that Joseph Smith did a lot with people that paid him to find treasure is they would know where the treasure was, because you could see it in the peepstone. And you'd go out there and you'd dig it out, and the spirits had moved it. So you would tell your sponsor, I know where it is, we're going to go, we're going to dig it up. You go, you dig the hole, it's not there anymore. Well, the spirits moved it. So we're going to have to go dig somewhere else, we need some more money. So this is what happened with the Golden Book. And Martin Harris is happy for 3 years. and then eventually he's like, okay, the 3 years is up, I've got the book. I have the book. Okay, we're going to start translating it. With the book in the ground, there was a pair of translators. And Joseph Smith called them Urim and Thummim, which is a name taken from the Bible. They're magic stones that were on Aaron's breastplate, Moses' brother. And he's going to use these to translate the book. But you can't see the book. I have the book, but you can't see it. The angel says no one else can see it. But we're going to take this book, and we're going to translate it, and we're going to make money. So they started working on the translation. And Joseph works on it some with his wife, right? And some with Martin Harris. And Martin Harris goes and helps him because he's like, okay, finally, we're going to get some money back on this investment. And they end up getting to 116 pages. And Martin Harris's wife, the whole time, is like, where are you going? Oh, you're hanging out with Joe Smith, but what are you guys doing? Has been giving him a hard time about sponsoring this guy who's kind of a known fraud and has been spending all this time and money helping out Joe Smith for this book. And Martin Harris has been explaining, and it's about how they're working on it. They've got 116 pages translated already from the book, and they're going to sell it. And Martin Harris's wife convinces Martin Harris, who convinces Joe Smith, to take the pages and show them to his wife so that she'll calm down and be happy about it. And then the pages went missing. And so Martin Harris explained to Joseph Smith, the pages are gone, we can't find them. And then Joseph Smith said, well, that's it. I told God, and an angel came and took the plates, and he took the translators, and we're done. No more. And that ended it for a while. But apparently it was a good idea, because later Joseph Smith got someone named Oliver Cowdery to help him do a translation again. And because God knew that they were going to lose the pages, God had prepared two different sets of that same part of the story, where there was from the larger plates, the more historical version, and then the more condensed, more spiritual version, that were all in the Golden Book. And we're not going to translate from the old one again. We're going to translate from the second copy in the same book, because it's going to be a little different, right? But it's okay, because God prepared the way for me to lose the pages, get the book taken away, get the book given back, and I'm going to translate it with my seer stone, the Old Faithful, right? And so they get this book translated and start trying to sell it. And Joseph Smith sends Oliver Cowdery because they can't sell a copyright for this book locally. Nobody was interested. They go up to Canada and try to sell it. The Canadians don't want it either. And so then they start proselytizing with it. So the Book of Mormon is mostly history. It reads a lot like if Kings, Corinthians, Acts of the Apostles, and the Gospel of St. Matthew had a baby. Okay? So it's a lot of history with some Jesus in it. And it takes place from 600 BC to 400 AD. So in 600 BC, Jesus, God, goes and tells this family in Jerusalem, these Hebrews, that they need to leave because Jerusalem's going to be destroyed. This is before the Babylonian captivity, right? And so then they take off and they walk down across Saudi Arabia and they build boats and they sail to the New World. And that's Lehi, his children, and their spouses. And they take with them a copy of scriptures called the bronze plates that they steal before they leave Jerusalem, kill the guy that was taking care of them, and take them and head to the New World. And so they have scripture, they have religious teachings, and they get to the New World, and they eventually split into two groups of people, the white people that are the good people, and the people that chose not to follow the prophets and God, and they were the cursed with dark skin, and they're the Lamanites. So you have Nephites.
Cursed with dark skin.
Yeah, they're cursed with dark skin, which is very similar to like, we could talk for days about race and Mormonism, but it's right. It's similar to the idea of the mark of Cain, and so they.
What about New World? You said they went to the New World.
Yes, sorry, the Americas.
We do mean the Americas.
I do mean the Americas.
600 BC.
Yes.
Yeah. You need to explain what the Mormons think the Book of Mormon is.
Yeah. So the Book of Mormon then is it's a tool because God knew that Jesus was going to come and save the world from sin. And then he knew that the Roman Catholic Church was going to come up and destroy everything good about religion. And then there was going to have to be fixed later. And so God provided for this other record to be built to support the Bible. And that was brought back with Joseph Smith, who we have the Apostasy, which is the death of proper religion after Christ's death. And after Paul died, it was just gone, right? And then we have the Restoration in 1830, where Joseph Smith brings back the truth and the light of the world. And the Book of Mormon is a tool to help show people that this has happened. And so a lot happened with that. Joseph Smith said that the angels like Peter, and I don't know the other two now.
Matthew, Mark, Luke.
Peter and a couple of others. Luke and John, I don't exactly remember. They came back and restored the priesthood, right? The priesthood being going back to Moses and Aaron, where you have what we call the priesthood, and that's the priestly line, the authority from God to act in God's name. And then with the great apostasy, that went away. And we say the Catholics don't have that, and the Protestants don't have that. Only God can do that. And it was lost, and so we had to have angels come from heaven and give it to Joseph Smith. And then he confers it to other people by the laying on of hands and by prayer. And so now we have the truth again. The church gets organized in 1830, and only a few years later, someone, Sidney Rigdon, in Kirtland, Ohio, joins the Mormon Church because of the missionaries that have been going out and because of the book. And he has a congregation of 100 people there in Kirtland, and they all convert. And so now most of the Mormons are in Kirtland because that's bigger than the group of people that are out there in Pennsylvania still. And so then Joseph Smith and his friends and family that are all the church at the time, they all moved to Kirtland, Ohio. And the Mormon Church does very well because we're now taking this book, the Book of Mormon, and going out to the world and explaining to people that God has restored the truth to the earth, and this book proves it. And especially in England in the late 1830s and 1840s, lots of people joined the Mormon Church. And at the time, you joined the Mormon Church, you all traveled to the Mormon Church headquarters. And so everybody went to Kirtland, Ohio. And then eventually got enough Mormons that they sent a bunch to Independence, Missouri. And so Independence, Missouri also had a large collection of Mormons. So now we have these groups that are bringing people, and they're all moving to Kirtland or to Independence. And that was fine, but Independence, Missouri, they had trouble because all of a sudden, out on the frontier in Independence, Missouri, you have a huge group of people that are different, that are weird. Most of them are of European origin, and they have this weird religion that we don't know anything about, and they're taking over everything. And they started having clashes between Mormons and settlers. And there were rumors that may or may not be true about groups of Mormons called Danites that were believed everything on the earth rightfully belonged to the Mormons because they're the true church, and they were taking stuff from settlers that weren't Mormon and giving it to the Mormons, like robbing homesteads, and that they were going to start killing people, and it was this big problem, and you eventually had an armed confrontation between Mormon settlers and non-Mormon settlers at Crooked River in 1838, and they shot at each other, and 3 Mormons and 1 non-Mormon died. And in retribution, and I don't remember if it was a day later or a week later, a bunch of settlers went out to Hans Mill at a Mormon settlement and opened fire and killed 17 Mormons. And then the Mormons all gathered up, and they built a hasty militia and were ready to fight. They were going to go to war. And then the governor of Missouri got the state militia, and they came down and said, our army's way bigger than yours. You need to surrender. And then Joseph Smith did. He surrendered. He and about 50 other Mormon leaders were all arrested, and some of them were released. Some of them went to prison in Liberty, Missouri. And the governor of Missouri signed an order that all the Mormons had to be expelled from the state. Right? And the Mormons called the Extermination Order. It's not its real name. It's something like the extradition or...
Extradition.
Thank you. The extradition. And these Mormons moved to Nauvoo, Illinois, primarily. And where there was nobody. They went to the far western reaches of the United States, to an area that nobody wanted. It was just terrible, boggy, marshy area, and they set up there and built farms. They built a city. And
Which city?
Nauvoo, Illinois.
Okay.
And Joseph Smith was in Liberty Jail. And while he was there, he talked to God, and he wrote down all of it. And it was great. I don't remember how long he was there, 6 months, something like that. It was a significant amount of time. And then they were doing a prisoner transfer, and his buddies showed up, and he escaped. And he went back to Ohio. And in those days, there weren't agreements between states in the United States for extradition or anything. He left Missouri, so he was fine. He escaped from prison. He went to Ohio. And he was there in Kirtland, and the other saints were up in Nauvoo, and that was fine until he got in trouble in the law in Kirtland because he wanted to open a bank, and he couldn't get permission to open a bank, and so then he made a building society, and he called it the Kirtland Anti-Banking Society, and they printed money with Joseph Smith on it, and the whole bank was based on the value of land, and because of Western expansion and speculation, the land was way overinflated. It's kind of like what happened to Ireland not very long ago, where you have banking based on land, and the price of the land falls. And then all of a sudden, all your money's worth nothing, and then these people that have lost everything try to take legal action, and Joseph Smith was in trouble with the law, and it was a big problem, and he fled Ohio, and took about half the members of the church from Ohio with him, and they left. And then everybody else stayed and kind of fell away from the Mormon church. But now everybody's in Nauvoo. And we still have missionaries baptizing people in England, mostly. And they're coming over to Nauvoo. And Nauvoo continues to grow. And it's in Nauvoo that we start practicing polygamy. So Joseph Smith knocked up the nanny. And his wife got upset. And so Joseph went and prayed and talked to God and got a revelation about how his wife needed to keep her mouth shut because it's what God wanted. Okay? And he wasn't choosing to have then what he was calling plural marriage. And he says that he and Oliver Cowdery like had his private marriage ceremony where they got married in the eyes of God on the side of the river, and so he wasn't cheating on his wife, he was just married to someone else too. And that's what God wanted. Okay? And so that's part of official Mormon doctrine, is this revelation from God about how Emma needed to shut up. And so, and then after that, it got weird because Joseph Smith didn't like getting caught. It is. It really is. After that, it got weird. Okay, Joseph Smith didn't like getting caught, and so he started doing this thing that's unique in Mormon history, where he started marrying women that were already married to other men, other members of the church. And people didn't like that, right? And there were, and nobody knows how many. And this is why none of his children with Emma went to Utah. Some of his children with other women went to Utah, but we don't know exactly how many or who. There are some that have tradition that this person was. We don't know, because they're all married to someone else, who's usually a member of the church. And so some people didn't like this, and a member of the leadership of the church, after his wife had been, Joseph Smith explained to his wife that they had to get married now because that's what God wanted, and she told her husband. He wasn't very happy about that, and so he did some digging and figured out all this was going on. You had the elite Mormons that were practicing polygamy in secret to everyone else. And so he wrote a newspaper, basically a broadsheet, the whole thing about what was going on, to explain to the Mormons living in Nauvoo about this secret polygamy thing that's going on. And Joe Smith was told about it, and he decided that the right thing to do then was to have some people go down and destroy the printing press. And so the thing is now that would be like vandalism or like, but in 19th century America, everyone had just learned to read and write, and the freedom of the press was a huge deal. Like now we don't care, we just do whatever the president says, right? Like who's telling the truth, nobody knows. But it was a big deal that he destroyed the printing press. And the state authorities were going to come get him for this crime. And Joseph Smith riled up the Nauvoo militia. He'd been in Nauvoo for a long time. He was the general of the Nauvoo militia. He had his own army. Okay, and so he got them all organized, and he was going to go to war with Illinois. They weren't going to come get him. And then at the last minute, he backed down again. And they took him and they put him in jail in Carthage, like kind of the next town over. And while he was there, an angry mob, who some people say, like when I grew up, I was told they were working for Satan because they were going to destroy the truth, right? And some people say that the law was mainly built out of former members of the church or people that were upset about polygamy or had some other beef with the prophet. It's tough to say because they didn't exactly take roll. But during the night, the prison guards left, and the mob was trying to break into the building. Joseph Smith had a gun that somebody had snuck to him earlier in the day, and he opened fire on the mob, and the mob returned fire, and Joseph Smith and his brother Hiram were killed. And so that was the end of Joseph Smith. And the Mormon church broke into pieces, right? We'd already lost a big chunk down in Kirtland, and then the people that were left had kind of a disagreement over who should be in charge now. Should it be Joseph Smith's son? Should it be his friend Brigham Young, who's one of his buddies in polygamy that was a big leader in the church? Should it be someone else? And they ended up splitting, and Brigham Young took what is probably the majority, but again, don't know exactly, the Mormons out to Utah. They left the United States and went to Mexico, because at the time, the territory of Utah was in Mexico. And there they felt that they could be not harassed. Very, very far from the Mexican government, middle of nowhere. And they continued to send missionaries out and continued to grow as people joined the church and went to Utah. And so now you have a group of people that are separated geographically, culturally, religiously from everybody. And they're continuing to grow in isolation. And they do pretty well out there in Utah. Until America gets bigger and, goes towards Mexico and takes half their country and makes it the western half of the United States. And then we ended up having what was called the Mormon War. So in the lead up to the Civil War, there was a lot of concern about the western states and adding states to the Union, and what on earth were the Mormons going to do? They're now in the United States, and there's this guy, Brigham Young, that's a polygamist. He has dozens of wives and children, and he's ruling this large group of people out there in the middle of nowhere, and nobody knows what way they're going to go. And are they going to support the North? Are they going to support the South? Are they going to be something else? What are they doing? And so the United States government sends a group of soldiers out to Utah, and the Mormons see this as an invasion, and the soldiers are told to go out there and not cause trouble, but keep an eye on things, or maybe if things go bad, you know. And so the Mormons start attacking their supply lines and doing all sorts of damage to them. It's during this time that something in Mormon history called the Mountain Meadows Massacre takes place, where there's a group of settlers. They're on their way to California, going down through Utah, and in the South, they're accused by the Mormons of being Army spies, and then they're released, and then they're attacked by a bunch of Mormons who were dressed up as Native Americans and killed everyone over the age of 8, and took all their cattle and everything, and it was like, this is what's going on. And then in Salt Lake, the Army builds a fort. The Mormons stop working on their temple. They hide it. They're convinced that the Army's going to come, take their children, kill them, because that's what they've been told about what happened before out in Nauvoo and out in Ohio. And so again, you have this, that ended up being diffused after a year. Brigham Young stepped down as the temporal leader, as the governor, and a non-Mormon was made governor of Utah. So that kind of worked out. And then Utah, for another 20 or how long? That's so when did polygamy end? It was, I wrote it down, I thought. I didn't write it down. 1890. So another 40 years, Utah was a territory, and the Mormons continued to practice polygamy. But the United States was getting big by then. All the area around Utah was states. There was just this territory, and it kept getting chunked. The Mormons called it the Territory Deseret, and the Americans called it the Utah Territory. And it kept getting pieces chopped off of it for like Colorado and for Idaho and Nevada and New Mexico, and they wouldn't make Utah state because of the polygamy. And they started putting taxes against them, and the Mormons this whole time are saying, no, polygamy is what God wants. It's what we're going to do. If polygamy ever taken off the earth, the church won't be true anymore. You will know this is not the true church that Joseph Smith brought back because we stopped doing polygamy. So we're not going to stop. And then in 1890, Lorenzo Snow had a dream, and God told him that it was time to end polygamy. And so then the Mormon church broke again, and most people stayed, and were like, oh, God says no more polygamy. So they kind of stopped practicing plural marriage. And people that were already married to multiples, they just stayed. Right? But this is after decades of the federal law trying to break down on polygamy. And then a group of people broke off and went west, a group of people broke off and went south, because they have to have polygamy or they're not the true church anymore. But most of the Mormons stayed. And they were relatively free from conflict, but in this time, continuing to grow, until in the 1970s, blacks not being allowed to be members of the Mormon church or hold became an issue, right? And again, the federal government starts putting pressure on the church to stop discriminating against African Americans, and it's tax penalties and stuff, and it's never going to change. God's never going to let blacks, because being black in the Mormon mind is the mark of Cain, and God punished Cain, and he was going to be a servant, and all his descendants were going to be servants. And then Noah's son had a black wife, and his son made fun of him when he was naked and drunk in his tent, and so that curse got dumped on him again. We're never going to stop being in servitude, and so God wants black people to be slaves, and it's never going to change until 1978, and then President Kimball had a dream, and it got changed. Okay, and so that's kind of Mormonism, very, very isolated, insular, always separate. We're right, everyone else is wrong. And you talk about cult mentality, and Christy as well. I mean, that was my very short, kind of expose on what Mormonism is, why it's kind of the way it is. We're right and they're wrong.